Nation, thank you so much for watching and or listening. I'm here with Kristen Perkins, and she's someone that started a CTM Academy, Clinical Trial Manager Academy, and we were just talking a little bit off air about why it's always good, Kristen, when you start a business or a service around a need that you had. Because if like that's why we
Mhm.
started our site consulting service. That's why we started most recently Patient Ace. That's why we started everything. Save Our Sites conference. It's everything I wanted or people around me wanted. Latinos in clinical research. I mean, these are not just like random ideas we asked Google, what should we do? These are
Mhm.
like, itches that we had to scratch. And rather than
Absolutely.
finding other people or wishing there was something, you just create it. And from what I'm hearing from you, it's the same reason with you and the CTM Academy that you have, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so I actually, I love that, and like entrepreneurial spirit kind of runs through my blood a little bit. My husband and I own our own business on the side called Inclusion Sports. So we were trying to serve a need for our own family of trying to introduce our son to sports, and it didn't exist. So we launched our own business.
But what is
Uh,
that called? What?
It's called Inclusion Sports. And so it's
Awesome.
inclusive sports programs for kids ages 2 to 10. So I'm based in the Boston area. And so right now we're primarily in Massachusetts, but we're working with a consulting agency to begin franchising soon. So really
Okay.
exciting, but like everything you said just hit home, because rather than spinning your wheels, it's like, how do you find solutions and then help as many people as you can, so that ideally you make people's lives better and they can maybe avoid some of the obstacles that you ran
Yeah.
into. And that's exactly why I started this. So yeah, I in my full-time job, and I work full-time in biotech outside of everything I just
In
said. So
biotech.
in biotech, yes, I work for a sponsor company in the Boston area, and I'm a
Kristen,
senior
give me
director.
studies, please. What kind of studies do you guys do?
We do
Oncology?
infectious disease.
Oh, okay. We can do
But I
some.
spent most of my career in oncology. So that's kind of like, up until the pandemic when there were different opportunities available to me, I really spent most of my career in oncology. But yeah, I'm a senior director of clinical operations at a sponsor company. And, I really
Smaller sponsor?
smaller. Yeah, we're quite small.
Wait,
Um,
really quick, because this is gonna be about the
yeah,
academy, but and career
yeah,
seekers, but just a special bonus Easter egg
yeah,
for the site owners watching before
yeah.
they leave.
Yeah.
If a site wants to approach a small biotech about getting studies for their site, what's the best way to do it? Like, what kind of emails do you want to see?
Okay, that's a good question. I think a lot of people find us honestly through clinicaltrials.gov. They tend to look us up and they'll get our, most companies, including the company I work for, we use a general inbox that is managed by one or more people at the organization that then filter it to anyone. If they get a request for a study, then it goes to whoever might be those study managers or program managers or whatever. So I would always say start there. That tends to have the best luck if there's reference to the fact that someone actually spent the time looking up the opportunities, references, the therapeutic area, what phase it's in, like kind of demonstrates that they did their research on it. We get a lot of spam from vendors and site networks that,
Bam. What
yeah,
constitutes, forget the vendors, that's
yeah,
obvious,
yeah.
but what constitutes a spam in a human's mind
Yeah,
from a site?
I'd say the things that I would delete without even responding to are just not even in our therapeutic area. You can tell they didn't go on our website. They didn't look us up on clinicaltrials.gov. They don't know what we're doing. They're just kind of doing some sort of like mass email approach. They might not even use the right name to me. That kind of stuff. It's like, at least take the time to know
Dear sir,
who's being
madam,
mentioned.
dear
Yeah,
sir slash madam.
yeah, exactly. I'm like, you sent this to like 1,000 people. And so where we've really, brought on successful sites that have reached out to us, like kind of cold called us, is if they know what we're doing. And maybe they've even listened to like one of our most recent like investor calls, or they know what's coming. And so they're like communicating their excitement to us and saying, if you have another study in this therapeutic area, we'd love to be a part of it. Please, add us to your site list or something like that. That tends to have more traction than kind of just doing a blast email saying, hey,
Yeah.
if you ever have a study for me, we'd love to be considered.
Makes sense. Thank you for that. That was a bonus for you site owners. Now you guys and gals can leave because we're
Yeah.
getting into career, but maybe not. Some of these site
Don't
owners want
leave.
to do, some site owners want to do side gigs. There's nothing wrong
Exactly.
with that. Or some site owners actually fed up being site owners and go want to go back to working.
Yeah.
So it's not for everyone. So okay, so you're a CTM for a biotech.
Yeah.
Can we go back a little bit
Yeah.
to how you get started, maybe your origin story?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I started my career in 2008. Kind of like didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I got my bachelor's degree, loved research in undergrad. And so I just thought I'll try to find some kind of job in research. And so I took a research assistant job at a site, essentially at Columbia University. And so I was doing, kind of anything they asked me to as a research assistant. You just say yes to everything. And then, so I was living in New York City, really wanted something a little bit different, making $35,000 a year, barely scraping by. I needed a change with that. And so I then moved into a CRC role, which is why I love the work that you're doing so much, because there was no support for me. It was really figuring things out on my own. Again, making 35K, not knowing where I could have leverage, not knowing what to focus on. And so I did that for a few years, realized that academia didn't really move at the pace that matched my career goals. I'm very ambitious. I really want to set goals and like see the impact. And I loved working with patients and working with sponsors. I did not love the bureaucratic nature of working at a site. And so I decided I was ready to look at a CRO. I thought that would be a really interesting next step. And I really, along the way, just followed my curiosity. And so I worked at one of the largest CROs as a clinical trial associate, got kind of mastered that very quickly,
What is
got
that
kind
role? Because even I still don't know after 20 years what that means.
Yeah, I mean, similar to a research assistant, you basically do whatever they ask you to do. I spent a lot of time in the ETMF. I spent a lot of time supporting CRAs with document collection, really like the back end, do whatever
I
has to
see.
be done.
Like what
Yeah.
they would call an in-house CRA now, or
Not even, because that's actually the next role that I moved to at
okay,
the CRO.
okay.
You're not interacting with sites in the CTA role at a
Ah,
CRO company, usually. At least you weren't when I was in that role. It's really back end. You report to like a CRO manager, and that's really your only communication with anyone. It's
gotcha.
very siloed. And I felt like I got enough information about how to do that job that I was then ready to do the in-house CRA role, which is what I did next. Loved that, but realized after a few years that I had kind of maxed out. CROs really focus a lot on how long you've been in a position, who's next in line for something. And I figured out that it didn't really matter how hard I worked, what results I got, if I wasn't in the position for the right amount of years, or if I wasn't next up in line to be a
Wow.
manager, I'd be waiting. Yeah. And again, like I'm too ambitious for that. And I was like, I need to be more in control of my career.
Do you think
And
CROs still operate that way? Hmm.
I work with several people in CROs in my current role. And yes, I do think there's a lot of times people get stuck in their positions, they get limited by opportunities because of you have to be in a position for 7 to 10 years for a certain
Yeah.
title to be available. Where on the sponsor side, you work your tail off, you get results, you get promoted. I mean, it's
I
very
see.
different.
Yeah, I think the incentives are make sense at
Yeah.
sponsor level. I don't know why. There's obviously very smart people running CROs.
Yes.
Why they don't,
But the metrics are
surely
different. So
the metrics.
the goals you work towards at a CRO are very different than the goals you work towards at the sponsor, which is why when I was at the CRO and I realized this, I was like, okay, now my next step is to go to the sponsor side because I want to be the one implementing the goals that actually have the impact. I want to be getting new drugs to market that have like huge impact on patients' lives. Like I don't want to be stuck in my goals being turning around a monitoring report in 10 business days. Like, does that actually move the needle? Yes, I understand for compliance reasons and things like that, but I wanted to get on the side of things where you really saw the impact you were having for patients. That's my biggest motivator. And yeah, after I was the in-house CRA, I looked for a sponsor job, kind of took a demotion back to a clinical trial associate role at the sponsor company that I was at, which was like a small to mid-sized oncology company. But even though it was a demotion by title, I actually got like a $20,000 raise because sponsor companies pay way more than CROs.
Why do they
So
do that? Why do you think sponsor companies pay more even for less responsibilities?
yeah, it's a good question. I think at a small to mid-sized biotech company, you're really expected to wear many hats. You don't have a siloed job description like you do at a CRO where, I don't want to say you're box checking, but you have a very narrow scope of what you're able to do in an in-house CRA role. At a CTA role at a sponsor company, you raise your hand and you get whatever opportunities you want as long as you're following through and you're producing results. And so I think people really expect on the sponsor side that you're going to go above and beyond, and that you're invested in the outcome.
The
Really,
mission, yeah.
yeah. And that was my experience. So I was in that CTA position for less than a year, got promoted to be a CTM, was in a CTM role at that company until we got an NDA approved. We then got acquired by Big Pharma. I realized Big Pharma wasn't for me. I like the small biotech kind of feel. Pandemic started. Everything I knew about my role kind of changed. And then I moved to where I am now, which is like a leadership position within clinical operations. And that really brought me to, connecting with you because earlier this year, I just had this like feeling of like I have to give back and like help other people um, avoid the challenges that I had along this over 16-year career path that I've had so far. And like, how do I help people ideally be a high performer, which is really what gets you paid better, gets you promotions, it gets you visibility, it gives you security, it gives job security when you
Yeah.
figure out the system, and then you can get whatever the results are that are important to you.
Well, let's talk about this job security right now, because right before
Yeah.
you, remember I warned you I might be a little late for our Zoom. I
Yeah. Yeah.
wasn't. I wasn't, but I interviewed Monica Quitiva, my CRC Academy co-founder, and like the unless you're living under a rock, CROs and big pharma are freezing jobs, like laying off, hiring freezes, which doesn't seem to be the case for some of the small biotechs and sites. But a lot of the roles at these bigger places are going overseas. Like even as a
Mhm.
side owner, even if I didn't know this stuff as like a podcaster,
Yeah.
just from being a side owner, who I'm interacting with to do my study startup, who I'm interacting to do my budgets, these are Latin America people. Like
Yeah.
their phone number shows I'm in Mexico City. You
Yeah.
know, like if you don't read the headlines, you're like, oh, whatever, it's a global CRO. In context of the headlines,
Mhm.
you're like, this is a major trend happening,
Mhm.
outsourcing. What do you have to say for people living in the United States? They're upset,
Yeah.
obviously, which by the way is not going to change anything. You
Yeah.
upset or not upset is not going to change global
Exactly.
outsourcing. So what do
Yeah.
you have to say to your colleagues or people
Yeah.
looking up to you about this?
Yeah. And this is exactly a woman approached me earlier this year when I opened up one-to-one coaching in my program and said it had just gotten laid off by a large CRO and said, I need job security. And what I found the biggest mindset shift is job security is not making sure that you don't lose your job. That's completely out of your control. You
Yeah.
can't, that's not security is having a network of people that you, if anything changes, you reach out to a lot of people in some diverse positions where you can start getting wheels turning so that if something happens, you have plan B, C, D, E, and so on. I also see job security as having like really strong skill sets so that you can have recruiters on speed dial, and you can be able to speak to your skills and how you can deliver for whoever your potential employer would be, And that is about really intentionally having the ability to see what you do well. And so I coach my clients on like when you write your resume, like I'm not a resume writer, but like here's how I do it, and here's how I get calls from recruiters. I highlight a couple of bullets on the specific results I've gotten, not just like what do I do every day in my task list, like your job description, but like I got, last patient, last visit to database lock in 10 business days. That's going to get me on a call with someone, not just I do data, I know data management. It's like, no, I get results and this is what I can do for your organization too. Those are the things, that's job security. And so
Specifics.
very specifics on, and don't BS it. Like really, if you don't have those results yet, that's where you come to people like us and you figure out how to get those results. But then once you get them, you find ways to like toot your own horn and have a lot of confidence in how good you are at your job. That's the job security. I
I
can
see.
say from a sponsor side, if you're running a primarily US study, you want primarily US central teams. So like when we're selecting project managers from our CRO company, we don't want a project manager in India because they're not on our time zone and it's going to be very difficult for us to have calls. I've run into that with colleagues in the EU, in South Africa. You can make things work, but if you're running a phase 3 trial, that's like really important for the success of your, small-ish biotech company. You need the top of the top team that has really strong communication at the CRO. You want someone you have access to all the time. And so that's where when we're selecting the right people to work with at the CRO, when we're selecting sites, all of that, I don't see that changing. I don't see how you can outsource those really critical positions that liaise directly with sponsors because US sponsors are going to be in US time zones. And I'm telling you right now, I don't really want to be on Asia Pacific time taking
But what
meetings.
about
So
Latin America though? Because that's the benefit of where I went to
yeah,
Mexico City in January. I was blown away, Kristen.
yeah,
Like I felt like I was in Research Triangle Park. Like there was PPD
yeah,
here, IQVIA there, Eli Lilly there, all in the largest city in North America. Like,
yeah,
and the people speak perfect English,
yeah,
well educated, more educated than the ones here, to be honest with you.
yeah,
And same time zone.
yeah. It is tricky. It is tricky. And I think, being able to focus on what that study is aiming to do, again, if it's primarily a US study, if it's a smaller study, if it's in phase 1 or 2 that is, primarily in the US, that's part of how you sell yourself and how you build your resume of like, here's the benefits of having a US based person. Even if it does maybe cost a little bit more money, you maybe can get more results. Maybe you have personal relationships with sites. This is the one thing that created the most success in my roles that I've had over the years of like going that extra step, understanding my sites, connecting with them personally, saying thank you, highlighting them to their managers, things like that. If you're just checking a box and you're putting someone in a role, maybe they're based in Latin America or somewhere else, they probably don't know the site that's down the street. Maybe they haven't worked with them over the last decade, building that relationship. Those are the ways that, like, I don't think, at least in the immediate future, that's not going to go away. And as we set up CRO partnerships, we meaning sponsors, those are the stories we want to hear that give us confidence to know the sites are going to deliver because they have a strong relationship with the CROs or with anyone that's involved in the site selection process. We want to know there's personal relationships. And I think that's just much easier to do when you're geographically located near someone, ideally in the same country.
That's a really good point. And I think you brought up another good point earlier about biotechs or smaller small sponsors and how they have more of an entrepreneurial
Yeah,
mindset, like
yeah,
versus, I guess, some of the large CROs that have just workers, like
yeah.
people that just do their job responsibilities and that's it. And with biotechs, I feel like the only con is either it goes out of business or it gets acquired by a big company, and then you got to go find another one.
But ideally, the people that this is where the relationships are super, super important. And this is what I coach my clients on. Like, your network doesn't end with whatever job you're in right now. So whether that is across the industry and you have a strong site relationship, with a sponsor or vice versa, ideally you want that to carry on long after your study is done, long after your company gets acquired or something changes. You want a Rolodex, maybe for any of the younger people, that's like, your little black book. All the people that you've been successful working with, whether that's sites, CROs, sponsors, so that when you do your next things, you make everyone's life easier. And ideally, those relationships live on for a really long time. And then it's win-win. I mean, that from a sponsor perspective, that is the best case scenario for us when it's win-win. We want sites to feel valued, and then we get value in return. And so I think if you set those relationships up from the beginning like that, they'll live on.
I think you're right. Well, speaking of drawing on my personal experience here in Yuma Clinical Trials, one of the first studies we were able to get, we're 3 years old now, but one of
Mhm.
the first studies we were able to get for one of our psychiatrists was with a small biotech, and they don't use any CROs.
Mhm.
And you get to know everyone
Yeah,
intimately as a site. And we did relatively good job for their study. They came back to us with more work. They're like, well, here's another protocol. Can you do
yeah,
this one too? So I feel like that is, to this company at least, valuable, whereas that whole process can get lost if outsourced to a CRO.
that's right. That's right.
Do
Completely
you?
agree. And, the CROs are always, I have a soft spot in my heart for CROs. I don't want it to come across that I don't. I think from my experience, they're really set up to be a machine. They're not set up to, when I say that they're like, people are siloed into their job descriptions, it's no fault of their own. They're doing exactly what's expected of them. That's just how it's set up, and it's very difficult to jump around and get different experience unless you like leave your department formally and you give up your role and you move to a
Yeah.
different one. Whereas on the sponsor side, you just raise your hand and say, I'm curious about this, and you just kind of poke your head in here, and you get to sit in a meeting with different functional areas that maybe you've never even interacted with before. It's just really
Wow.
different.
It's so
And that's what I
different.
love about it. Yeah, like I'm a really curious person. I love learning. I love being around really smart people. And so I want to have access to that.
Yeah, me too. I think in a parallel universe, I would work for a biotech. Maybe there's still time. Uh,
There's always time.
just from my experiences over the years, I've been a site owner since 2005, and it's night and day difference, like
Yeah.
biotech versus big pharma using CROs, and the people that work for those companies,
Yep.
they seem to have more pride in what they
Yes.
do. Everybody's more invested, whereas at a big CRO, everyone's like, yeah. And you said it yourself at the beginning of this episode. You said there's no incentives at the CRO. It's not about how hard you work or how outside of the box you go with your job responsibilities. It's how long you've been there, which is why there's so much turnover at the CROs.
Right. And CROs make money by the amount of work. So, when you think about that, if there's a protocol amendment, if there's changes that delay the study, from being completed on time, that actually benefits the CRO. They make more money. While on the sponsor side, every month that the study is delayed, it's depending on whether that sponsor is going to be around. I mean, that could be the month of millions of dollars paid out that does it all. So it's really, when you think about, when you just kind of question it, you can kind of get a feel for it. And I have found that when sites, CRO, and the sponsor are working together towards a shared goal, which is how I set up my teams to do, you'll get results unlike you've ever seen before. In my experience, when you do that, you can enroll very, very quickly. You are really collaborative on, like, if you hit a road bump, there's not finger pointing. It's like we all want to get the right patients in because we understand the benefit it could have for them if the drug is shown to work. So like, how do we do that? How do we work together to identify
Yeah.
eligible people? It's just a really different vibe than if there's this like us versus them feel that you can get sometimes in the industry. And that, to go back to like what I've set up. So with the clinical trial manager, which is like my online space that I've created to really, like you said, like an academy, but it's so much more than that, where we have free resources where, if you're interested, if you're a current or aspiring clinical trial manager, really focused on the sponsor side, but it could be anywhere. A lot can be applied across the board, but the types of topics I teach are like how to really hit it out of the park as a high performer. And so there's things like, how to manage study budgets, how to manage study timelines, how do you provide monitoring oversight, how do you have inspection readiness from the start of your trials, like things that are really like important on the sponsor side. I have a bunch of free stuff that I am giving away for that. I have group coaching programs so that people can really not only learn all of the important information they need, but build their network in the process and receive mentoring and coaching from me. And then other things like a mastermind program and things that really create the space for people who are really ambitious. This isn't for people that are like, I want to buy an online course so that I can learn a couple of acronyms. This isn't for you. This is like for people that are like, I see my potential. I don't know how to get there. I need help getting, like bridging that. I know I need to learn some new things. I need to build my network. I probably need some individualized coaching. Ideally, you get that from someone who's already been in your shoes,
Who's your
things that,
like archetype client? Like, is it a former CRA or maybe someone just got laid off or
yeah.
what? Who is it?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that. So when I launched this earlier this year, I labeled it as ClinOps Career Accelerator because I really wanted it to be open to anyone that works in clinical operations across the industry. And what I offered was one-to-one coaching. And I did that really intentionally so I could treat that as a pilot and figure out who am I attracting and what do they want. And that way I could build this, what is now the clinical trial manager space. And who I attracted were really junior CTMs, so people like associate CTMs or CTM ones, people who had been in a clinical trial manager job for 1 to 2 years, maybe, and people who were more in that like clinical trial associate or clinical trial specialist role, either at a CRO or a sponsor. So they're around colleagues who are in these roles. They're feeling resistance to them having opportunities. So whether their manager has given them feedback of like, yeah, you're not ready for this role yet, keep going with where you are, but they're not getting direct feedback on like what they need to do to actually move into that role. Or they feel stuck. They don't understand why they're not getting traction. So what I found was like meeting with these people and getting feedback. I had 6 people in my one-to-one program this spring. They all ask the same questions. They all want to learn the same information, and they all feel like building an organic network of professionals is really hard because it feels salesy and cheesy, and they don't want to like cold call people on LinkedIn. Like that doesn't feel authentic to them. And so they're like, but I don't know how to do it because now everyone's working remotely for the most part.
Yeah.
So how do you do it? And so that was the light bulb moment for me of like, okay, they're all saying the same things. They're all essentially at the same career level. This is who I need to tailor what I have to teach to, because this is where I can have the biggest impact and help people get the results they're looking for once they're either thinking about moving into a clinical trial manager role or they're already in it and they're feeling stuck.
Yeah, Kristen, we have to get you at a Save Our Sites
Yes,
conference.
I need to hear all about it, and we'll connect because I feel so passionately about, I mean, I hope you feel that like the service
Yeah.
that we should all be, when we know something, we should share it. And that's how I feel
I was just
about.
gonna ask how come I don't know you prior to you emailing me.
Well, I have 3 kids ages 6 and under. I've been busy the last few years and
Okay,
trying to
fair
grow my
enough. Fair enough. Fair
yeah,
enough.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you have the course out now or the service
So
out now?
it's not available yet. And so what I'm doing on August 19th, I'm actually offering a free masterclass for people to join, which is
Ah,
really just teaching everyone how to be a high performing clinical trial manager. Here's the things you need to know. It's perfect for people that are like ready to like take some action, and it's free, so you don't have to commit to anything with me. I'm going to give away a lot of information in addition to a bonus on like how do you get published, how do you get to be a speaker at conferences, how do you, those extra things that like make you stand out on your resume that you're really proud of, how do you actually get those? Because sometimes it feels like there's like the secret club of like you have to like know someone to get these
yeah.
things, and it's very straightforward. So these are the types of things that I want to teach so people can start doing the things that like light them up and
Interesting.
showcase their skills. So I'll be teaching that August 19th. And then after that masterclass, I'm going to be launching everything on my new website, which is finishing up development right now. And yeah, I'm really excited. I'll be having online courses available, and then my group coaching program, which is like really my signature offer for people, because I feel like it has the most transformational results. I feel like if you
Yeah.
enter this, it'll be a 6-month container of support. I feel like if you combine the education, the networking, and the mentoring, you can literally do anything you want to do.
Yeah. I'm glad someone else is saying it for once. I've been saying the same. I mean, it sounds like you sound like me when I'm telling people all these things.
Yes, yes.
Do you have a LinkedIn people can connect with you?
Yes. So personally, I'm Kristen Perkins on LinkedIn, and then the clinical trial manager is also its own
It'll
page. And I
be
should,
underneath. Yeah, I'll
yeah,
put Kristen's LinkedIn underneath.
yeah,
You were speaking about speaking at conferences.
yeah,
Would love to have you on a panel at
yeah,
SOS. I'll talk to the team about it.
yeah.
It's gonna be in Oklahoma City. You ever been?
Oh, never been. Oh, I've driven through Oklahoma when I lived in California, drove cross country for a little bit.
This year's was in Tucson, but I didn't know who you were, so and you probably
Yeah,
didn't know about it. But
yeah,
this was our inaugural one. But it's a bunch of site owners that came together and say, you know what, we're tired of like being overlooked by the big site networks,
yeah,
and everyone's talking about diversity and inclusion, and
yeah,
we're the small sites out here that are still growing year over year revenue, like the only ones still hiring more or less. And there's a lot of parallels actually between small sponsors and small sites. And
yeah,
I think it's like either a match made in heaven when they combine,
yeah,
or a horrible situation if they combine, depending on who's the
yeah.
CTM,
What's up?
who's the
Yeah,
site owner. Those relationships I
completely.
think matter a
Yeah, and
lot.
I'd love
So
to speak. I mean, I've had both experiences where
me
it's gone
too.
really well. The ones where it hasn't gone as well, it's been more of a quality issue. So I'd be happy to speak more about that, about, what can maybe sites make sure they have in place so that, especially if they want to be successful, they're going to be high enrollers, they're going to be targeted for audits from the sponsor. So you really have to have some really robust processes in place. Otherwise, there can be some panic at the sponsor of like, why are these things not in place? We thought when we
Yeah.
selected this site, they were way more equipped to manage this, and now we're a little concerned. So yeah, there's a lot that,
What's
and then
like
there's a
two
lot
of the most common that you've seen
of
for sites?
the
Yeah.
findings, like for our sites, really lack of source documentation. So maybe sites don't have their own kind of templates, and so they're like kind of one-off creating source documents for each study they're on, and they missed a couple of like important exams, from the CRF, and then all the patients at that site
Oops.
don't have that lab, and you're just like, no. So that's a big one. And then probably like IP. I mean, that's another big thing, how they're receiving the investigational product, how they're storing it, um, how they're doing accountability. Are they actually collecting the bottles or whatever they're, if it's tablets and capsules or whatever, are they collecting it back from the patients? Is there a diary that like truly documents what the patient did?
Yeah.
Like that has come up a lot where you can't validate it because there's no source for it.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm always doing it to check where we stand. So, and these are the
Yeah,
things we talk about at Save Our Sites.
yeah,
So, I think it'll be a
yeah,
good place for you to go. And there's a lot of CRA. Here who goes besides the obvious, the sites.
yeah,
It's cheap enough to where frontline workers can go on their own
mhm,
dime. Like it's like $250
yep,
max.
yep,
So you get people come to these conferences that actually do the work as opposed to
yep,
like scope,
yep,
which my colleague Dr. Fox calls the mouthwash conference because it feels good when you're there, but then as soon as you get on the plane, the stench comes back. And that's because the executives are there, not the
yeah,
frontline workers. So
yeah,
that's who we're trying to attract through these
yeah,
videos and through the conference. So it'd be
love
great to
it.
get you there. We'll talk to the team about it. It's also really nice to meet you.
Yeah, you as well. This
Thank
has
you
been
for
a
reaching
pleasure.
out.
And yeah, like I said, I love what you're doing. I've actually been following you for quite some time. And I always thought, I wish this existed when when I was in the roles, like a CRC, um, I remember when I first went in that role, I felt like that imposter syndrome feeling. And so I just started like taking trainings at the organization. I took so many trainings, and most of them weren't really what I needed to be focused on. They were just what was available. And I just wasted a lot of time. And I went through the certification through SOCRA and all that stuff, and I could talk all about that some more. I got a master's degree. I don't know if you really need that. So it's just funny. You just, you figure it out. And if I had someone to kind of lean on, I probably would have made some different decisions along the way.
Yes. No, I'll definitely have you back on maybe after your master class to give
Yeah, cool.
feedback. Um,
Yeah,
that you'd be an awesome guest to
yeah,
keep having on for multiple reasons, but
yeah,
career-wise, site-wise, we need more people like you sharing their knowledge. So thank you for that,
absolutely.
Kristen. Everyone go connect with her right now. Her LinkedIn is underneath this video or in the show notes if you're listening. Go connect with her right now. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Dan.